welcome. My name is Josh KAMPEL. I'm the CEO of Techonomy Media. Appreciate you joining us. Really wanted to also thank Wipro for partnering with us on this event. We appreciate everyone showing up today. And David, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Josh, and thank you to Wipro for partnering with us on this session. I think we're on a topic today that is super timely, but more than just timely, it's really urgent. And I wouldn't say it's an emergency issue, but it's something that we have to figure out as a society and as companies in a way that I don't think for the most part we have done thus far. And I just saw something which some of you may have seen today that underscores, I think, the urgency of the discussion. But it's a bigger picture point, but I wanted to make it just because the visual is so striking. Probably most of you don't receive the physical New York Times, which I still do as a journalist. But if you got the business section today, this is what it looks like. And it was unprecedented. I'm going to stand up. This is, not just the newspaper like this. They actually printed it this way. This is unemployment numbers in the US in the last 4 weeks. And each dot represents 1,000 new unemployment applications. This is 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. It just goes to show what a bizarre and scary moment we're in terms of work. So in order to discuss what's happening with work and how we really need to understand and move toward a much more flexible understanding of people's needs, and to a lesser extent, but a real sense, companies' needs, we've got a terrific trio of panelists here. Mike Morris is the CEO of TOPCODER, which is a company that helps people basically work flexibly for companies. And Mike, if I'm not mistaken, you have about 1.5 million people in your community. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you can tell us more about it in a minute, but it's growing dramatically. A lot of the work that TOPCODER does is engineering and software work, but they also have design and data science as key specialty areas. The company's been around for a long time. Wipro bought them 3 years ago. Next, on my screen anyway, is Gary Bowles, a longtime friend of Techonomy and one of the world's leading experts on what's happening with work, who has been running the Future of Work program at Singularity University for the last several years, and really is going to start out by giving us a big picture view of what he calls the Great Reset. And he recently wrote an article for Techonomy about the Great Reset, which is what's happening now with work. Finally, Gina Hadley, another close friend of Techonomy and a co-founder of The Second Shift, which is a employment, I'll let Gina to describe, but it's a broker of jobs, especially focused for women who have been out of the workforce but are coming back and who have tremendous talents but want more flexibility. And I'll let Gina describe it in more detail, but was that a good rough description, Gina?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll correct any error in that.
I will indeed, I promise.
No, you can do it now, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, we're just like TOPCODER, we're a marketplace that connects a vetted membership of professional women. Our members have never, ever stepped out of the workforce. This is not a returnship. These are for women who have decided not to take a step back and are desperately trying to keep working without leaving the workforce.
Right, okay, thank you for correcting.
That's okay.
Okay, Gary, I want to turn to you to start because you do have a very good big picture view. When you say we're in the middle of the Great Reset, what does that mean?
So first, I appreciate the invitation and appreciate the opportunity to publish the article. So I know that there's been a lot of discussion just trying to sort of grok the period that we're in, and so we went back and we looked at some of the data from the previous recessions, and some of the dynamics of what happens to work markets, and tried to say, okay, so what's similar to what's happening now, and then what are some of the steps that we've followed in the past? How do those work? And then how can we be thinking about the phases that we're in and some of the strategies? And so what became pretty clear is that in the past, at least, these things go through three phases. There's definitely, and people always talk about, is this a V, a U, or some other odd shape? There's always a period where you're falling off the cliff. And so we're still in that free fall right now. We basically locked things down really about a month ago. And that's when the unemployment claims started coming in. And now we're about at about 22 million in the past month. And we've already surpassed the crescendo of the Great Recession and in about 4 weeks. And then there's a period where you're sort of riffling along the bottom, and with the Great Recession, it actually ended up being this sort of slow curve coming back. And then there's a third phase that you're starting to actually rebuild the work markets. But there's a lot of things that happen and how we wave a magic wand. I say there's 4 domains for the future of work: individuals, organizations, communities, and countries. And so for individuals, what do people want? They want to be able to find or create meaningful, well-paid work. So what we need to do is we need to reduce the friction and increase the efficiency by which people find or create meaningful, well-paid work. And then organizations always need to have the talented people that can solve their problems of today and tomorrow. And so that process we have to fix. We have to make that much more effective for both, because we need to make it where organizations can specify the kinds of talents that they need to be able to solve problems. And people need to be able to talk about the superpowers that they have to solve those problems. And we need to make those markets more efficient, because what ends up happening, if you think of it as a pyramid, is that the people with the greatest capacity, the highest in-demand skill sets, the ones with the most access, the ones with the greatest networks, are the ones that always do well. And what has happened over and over again in recession after recession in the past is that the more disadvantaged become even more disadvantaged. That is, if you look at the distribution of work right now that can be done remotely, with one exception, in every industry, it's actually biased towards the low end, the less paid of the people who can't work remotely. They must be in person, and therefore, in this era, they're put at risk. And then when markets recalibrate, after the Great Recession, 97% of all the net new work that was created, of the net new jobs that were created in the return from the Great Recession, those were in some way non-standard. They were temporary, they were part-time, there's some way that they were not standard jobs. And so what ended up happening, the people who have those are the ones last in, first out. And that's what happened when you saw so many layoffs and furloughs, is those were a lot
Uber
of
and Lyft drivers, et cetera. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Mike, you are essentially operating now something that is in effect a model for what the whole economy ought to become more like. So I would love you to talk a little bit about the insights that you've gotten from running TopCoder. Tell us a little bit about what it is, but also what is the future you see, and how will it differ from what we've been living through up until now?
Yeah, thanks. So, I mean, having the pleasure of running TopCoder, the thing that I have seen in our pocket of the world is that you can have a model where, and I agree with everything we were talking about, but I also think that it is possible to have a model where those kind of temporary jobs are actually what people want and are better for people. And I look at like platforms as they have to figure out how to make that, how to make those opportunities, something that people will, number one, want to do, and something that people can, fairly and equitably get paid for. So our job, since the beginning of TopCoder, our job has been, how do we find the right opportunities for our community, match them together, and give people those, democratize that opportunity out to them. And the way we've always led with, is it has to be good for the community, and then everything else will follow, right? And I think that's the important part of platforms today. Like if a platform's out there and they're trying to find, the lowest cost way to get something completed, I don't believe that's going to work for us. I don't believe that's going to work. I don't think that capitalism is going to let that model work sustainably for a long time. The experience has to be really good for the community. And I am proud to say that at TopCoder, like our team, you know, that's first and foremost for us. That's our North Star. And what I'm seeing right now is, I mean, we're obviously incredibly busy. We're lucky enough to be busy because we're born in this virtual model. But I do think that coming out of the other end of this, we're going to see a sustained need, two sides of it, right? Two sides of it. You're going to see a sustained need of enterprises that are going to want to stay resilient. Okay. They're going to want to stay resilient for their ability to, I mean, I've seen it with our customers where some of them are just taking their workforce and going from X to a half X. And that's really difficult. Seeing it where other companies realize that the amount of talent that they have may be the right talent, but maybe the right amount, but it's not the right skill sets, right? All of a sudden, you know, network operators, they need a ton of network engineers, but they don't need these other skill sets. So they have to change their workforce. And then there's other companies that are actually growing in demand. You know, I mean, just think about, you know, the healthcare space, you know, people that are running Zoom. Yeah, I mean, they're growing in demand. And people will remember this and want to be more resilient going forward. Our duty is to figure out how to make that resiliency work for the talent, for the workers, and not just the high end. And that's a hard problem, but not just the high end people that are always going to stay busy, but how do we make sure that it can work for, and that's going to take, that's a lot more than TopCoder. That's a lot of other companies that are going to have to come together and create these models. But I put a lot of pressure on the platforms. It's incumbent on them to really make that experience work for the people. And I think we'll look back and this will be a turning point for this industry, which, you know, that's my opinion.
Do you see company attitudes changing in real time right now about what they can do with a sort of temporary on-demand workforce?
Absolutely, 100%. And I do. I mean, I'll tell you that I'm happy to say that most of what I am seeing is being driven from a point of doing the right thing, number one. And that makes me proud, like, to be associated with those types of companies, because it's not about, hey, can I save some points here on my margin? Can I save some points there on my margin? It's, you know, how do I share this with other people? How do I do something that's going to impact other people positively? And like personally for me, I've got a little mental list of the companies that I'm seeing, big and small, that are doing the right thing during this period of time. And that branding to me will last forever. And I'm hoping that is more than beyond just my feelings. I think a lot of companies, a lot of loyalty are going to come out of, you know, companies that are doing the right thing during this period of time. Yeah. I mean, down to my local physical therapy shop in Bedford, New Hampshire, you know, all the way to the largest telecom operators, and all in between. I think we're going to see leaders evolve.
Is pretty much your whole company distributed, more or less?
We're 100% virtual. We've always been. So there's about 120 people inside core TopCoder, and then there's a 1.5 million people in our community. And I mean, we're 100% virtual model. So this is sort of business as usual for us, except that everything around us is changing. And that causes a ton of disruption. Actually, if you can see out my window, you're going to see my 13-year-old running laps around the house.
It's too bright for us to see out your window, but so you know, you are to some degree creating a model, like I said, that others can follow. And it sounds like, based on the experience you've had, which is more or less at the high end of a sort of technical capability, that you are optimistic that we could build as a society systems that would apply similar models to a much larger percentage of the workforce. Is that a fair summary of what you think long term?
I absolutely think we can do that. And I think we can do that in a way that that protects the workers, right? Protects the talent, which I like to call. And I think that, you know, I think that's going to be driven from, again, platforms have to take on that burden, in my opinion. And I think that government and society has to put the guidelines in place for that. that's what I think will happen.
Yeah, and I want to come back to maybe some examples of things that companies can do that they may not fully realize, because I know you've really got a lot of learning about that, and a little more about how TopCoder actually makes that happen. But Gina, let's go to you. Tell us more exactly than I'm capable, clearly, what Second Shift does and what you're seeing in terms of the attitudes of both employees and employers, and maybe the world you seek, sort of as Mike was just articulating.
Thank you so much for having me. Just like Mike, the Second Shift is a talent platform. We connect our vetted membership of professional women with companies that understand their talent and are leaning into a more diverse way of looking at work. My co-founder Jenny and I started the company because we are these women. For, more than 40% of college education force for a period of time, which has led us to that hideous lean-in McKinsey pipeline that we can constantly see. So even before this moment, our mission at the Second Shift is to empower companies to look at many different strategies to get work done. And our thesis is, if you want to see a more diverse workforce, you have to work with them on their terms. And for us, it's a very specific demographic of professional women. We are lucky enough to work with companies who have been since we launched our MVP in 2015, who are embracing the quote unquote future of work, which is actually here. And when you talk about the future of work, if you keep saying the future, it means that you're putting off what you should have been doing probably 2 years ago. And now you're in this moment where you don't understand a distributed workforce and you don't understand how to handle remote teams. So I feel blessed that we have companies that are already working this way. What's been interesting is seeing how rapidly stakeholders and decision makers are embracing change because they have to, which I'm going to optimistically hope sticks when we get out of this moment. There is still an old-fashioned idea about how people get work done. And I think there are a lot of managers who feel that if they can't see you and they can't monitor you, they don't think that you're actually working. One of the things, David, you and I talked about yesterday was this whole idea of trust. And there is a necessity to trust your workforce at this point and the people that work for you in a way that you maybe didn't have to before, because you were able to hold on to some information because you knew you could disseminate it when you needed to. Where at this point, if you don't have a clear vision and you're not articulating to your teams, whether they be your full-time employees or the consultants that you work with, what the end goal is, there's not that kind of, we can't all sit on Zoom all day long. We can't we're all exhausted. The anxiety this is not a real moment of remote work anyway, because as Michael said, his son is doing laps around the house, making 3 meals a day. We're all having anxiety. So if we can learn in this really specific moment that is so hard, new and adaptable techniques, imagine what we can do when we're not all afraid that we're going to be ill and we're actually able to have interactions. So we've been really pleased with how we've started to hear from companies who we had been in talks with for quite some time, who are beginning to realize, I can't pretend that I can hire full-time people to come into the office all the time. I have all this work that needs to get done. And I mean, I think both Gary and Mike can speak to the endless loops of, when we're bringing people on, the interviews, everybody's got to be the perfect match, the cultural fit, all of these things. I honestly believe that's an impediment to getting talented people into your workforce that maybe don't fit the mold that you think they would. And so with kind of this idea of maybe I'm engaging somebody for 6 months, I'm open to the mindset that I don't have the exact same person to sit in this seat that I had before, but maybe I'll get somebody with a similar skill set who can bring other things to the table and to the team. This is also how you engage with diversity, because it enables you to look at somebody with a different view, and it's not maybe the formula that you thought that had to be that person to take that job.
Yeah, this issue of what has to change in the managerial mindset in order to move into the world we want is a very interesting one. And Mike, one of the things that I'm interested in that TopCoder does, you have this idea of co-pilots, and you have some very creative ways of intersecting with the company. Maybe just quickly talk about that, and then I want to hear Gary talk also about what he would like to see happen in the mindset of managers. But Mike, how do you think about that?
Yeah. So interesting enough, our co-pilots are basically managers that grow up inside the TopCoder community. So think about virtual people that can help run work. And the funny thing is that these evolved out of the 2008 crisis. Now, that's where co-pilots came up, and it was a couple of reasons. One is we needed the role, we needed to be completed. Two is we knew that we could get that talent virtually stronger than we could hire it and put it inside an office building. And the third one was we wanted a career path within the community. There's nothing that you shouldn't be able to get in this world that you can get in a traditional world. So co-pilot to us is like, they're the glue that helps people use these new models. So think of them like they're a Sherpa for you. Like they're gonna help you run pieces of work, get things done. They've done this before. They've been successful. They've been vetted, and you create relationships with them like you're used to, like human-to-human interaction. So
you mean on both sides of the equation. So both the company that's the kind of your client is making those relationships, but also the people doing the work on the other end are making so that person is like an intermediary, right?
For sure. Yep. And in our view of the world, we don't measure based on effort. We measure based on what you're able to accomplish, what outputs you're able to create. And I think that as you look at this time that we're in right now, I think people are realizing that, and the ones that weren't doing that previously are having a difficult time. They're thinking to themselves, how do I know my person is sitting at that computer for 8 hours a day? How do I know that they're doing the work that they're supposed to be doing? Well, if you're managing them based on the output that they're creating, the value that they were giving to the organization, you'd never have that question. And I think that'll be a really positive thing that will come out of this, is we will learn. As in many industries, we will learn how to manage workers in a way that is better for both sides. And I firmly believe that, and that allows people to, like I said, we don't believe in the tracking. We don't believe in the pay per hour use of. It just doesn't work in our view of the world again. But we do strongly believe in the pay for the outcomes that you create. And I don't care where you are when you create that. You could be on your boat. You could be in New York. You could be in Sweden. You could be in Australia. It doesn't matter to me. It's the value of the work that you're creating. And that'll be something that comes out of this that is positive for us, is people will be, learn that technique of managing their workforce, managing their teams.
Yeah. I love in that video you have, which is quite good. I think we're going to tell everybody about it. You have, I think it starts out with somebody driving like to a park to set up their laptop on a picnic table with a view of a bay or something. But Gary, I do think this issue of the mindset that managers have and how that has to change is a pretty significant impediment to the world we seek, so to speak. So can you talk about how you see that?
Yeah, and I'm sure Ulysses will want to weigh in on that too. So
let Ulysses tell us what he or she thinks.
I'm going to see what Gibson has to say, but he's asleep.
Okay. All right. Yeah, we have to let the animal kingdom have a voice. So a couple things. First off, I think that everything that Mike, you and Gino are talking about in terms of essentially the way I frame this is work is essentially just three things. It's a problem to be solved. It's our human skills performing tasks to solve those problems. So it's sort of three elements, right? And in the past, what we've done is we've put managers in just impossible positions and created what I call management by surveillance. If you can't see the worker in front of you, then they're not doing their work. And we inherited that from the industrial era. where we were trying to figure out how do we scale this, this thing called human work. And we just failed miserably to reinvent that. So what both Gina and Mike are talking about is essentially becoming very problem centric. So the more when you go to try to get somebody to work as a freelancer or part of a team to do some work, well, you've got to be more explicit about defining the problem, or you even have to have them be part of the process of defining the problem. So that's what happens in these kind of more project centric and platform centric kinds of work. And then human skills, as Gina, as you were saying, you've got to have a much more open mentality about the kinds of skills, especially the transferable skills that could be solving problems. Because what you essentially want is people that can dynamically bind around problems. Unfortunately, with management by surveillance, it's all about structure, hierarchy, and so on. And so I say, well, the old model of an organization is a box. There's abundance outside the box. There's lots of talent. And there's scarcity inside the box. There's only so many traditional job roles, and they're in a hierarchy, and that's it. And so HR has been put in the uncomfortable position of trying to manage scarcity. But if you want to show pictures of this, well, imagine a network, capital N, capital W, where you've got everything from, sure, core employees, that's a standard use case for work, but you've got contractors, you've got partners, you've got crowd platforms, you've got your customers, you've got a range of different problem solvers that can all dynamically bind around the problems of your organization. And what I hear both Gina and Mike talking about is that we can actually design those platforms in benevolent ways. What's happened, unfortunately, with some of the two-sided work markets, like the Ubers and Lyfts and Mechanical Turks, is that they sort of become a race to the bottom. There's 2 out of 3 players in online work markets: supply, humans, demand, the problems to be solved, and then the platform. And unfortunately, with many of these platforms in the past, they've been optimized so that only 2 win, and that's the demand and the platform. And then there's a race to the bottom on wages. And so what Mike was talking about in trying to figure out how do you keep that supported, it clearly works well for in-demand skills. What we have not solved, and what the Great Reset is painfully making clear, is that there's a whole bunch of people whose work actually does not work this way. That is, they can't deal with precarious shifts, right? You can't deal with a shift that keeps on bouncing in and out. We've already had a ton of workers that have been dealing with that before the Great Recession. And so they can't just suddenly, because they don't have childcare, or because their kids get home at a certain time, or their family's sick, they don't have the luxury of being able to have that very adaptive kind of work environment.
Yeah, one of the interesting things I heard on TV, which we've all been somewhat compulsively watching lately, is, Trump wants to bring everybody back, but if schools don't open, people aren't going to be able to go back to work. Just to name one thing. But I have 2 more things, and then I want to hear from audience or whatever they are, questions. Gina, you talked about diversity, and one of the more interesting things about this, the opportunity that a more flexible workplace with platforms in the middle could enable for companies, which they say they want, is to tap into much more diversity and inclusion. So, so in a sense, there really is a tremendous, there's a set of hidden benefits here that many companies may not have yet even recognized. Talk about that briefly. And then I want Mike and maybe Gina too, to talk about community and the way that bringing the kind of worker set together as a body is also critical to making this new landscape work properly. So Gina, on diversity. And Gary, if you want to chime in on any of this stuff. Uh-oh, Josh, you got to unmute
Okay,
Gina.
there we go. Thank you.
I think I could do it too, actually.
I got it. Okay, so I got confused because I couldn't unmute myself.
Oh,
so,
I'm sorry. I was just asking you to talk about diversity and inclusion and
Yes.
how much of a sort of hidden asset that is to this whole landscape.
Well, I think one of the things that Gary brought up that we continue to talk about, those of us who work within this, and I'm sure, Mike, you have this conversation with your teams as well, is how do you also create that level of trust between your employer, HR, diversity and talent, recruitment, procurement, and yourself as a platform, so that they feel that they can trust the assets that you're bringing to them. I think we have, HR and talent forever has been asked to figure out vacation and benefits and not get sued. And now we're asking them to break everything that they believe in. We're asking them to all of a sudden adhere to lean and agile mentality, which is not anything that we've ever asked of procurement. And usually they're just trying not to get sued. I mean, one of our bigger clients on the West Coast, a tech company, I mean, I can assure you everyone in procurement and HR, they all have PTSD from being sued numerous times. So they paper everything. And it's what Gary was saying is when you put these kinds of barriers to entry and you make it more difficult and you are in a mindset that anybody that's not in our box is not part of us, it makes it very hard to take advantage of all of the talent that's out there. And we believe that part of that is also you don't take advantage of diversity of thought. You don't take advantage of folks who perhaps, as you were saying, David, can't commute into your office, who maybe can't afford to live in Seattle or San Francisco or New York or Miami or a big city, who can't afford healthcare, who can't afford childcare, have other things that are making it impossible for them to engage in the traditional workforce. And that's a tragedy because there is so much talent out there that would be so willing to engage, but there have been so many barriers to entry that they're not able to. For us, we work with highly competent professional women who've spent decades honing their careers and sharpening their skills. But I also believe that if we are able to create this kind of ecosystem of trust and bringing in folks that we probably haven't engaged with before, that may start with somebody who knows exactly what they're doing, like my members and part of Mike's community. But then it also allows for different types of engagements because you're starting to break down these preconceptions that you had of what it is to engage with your workforce. When I hosted the tech, I think I did a panel 2 years ago at Techonomy with a couple of extraordinary talent and people officers. And I will never forget that the line that sticks with me the most is this whole idea of culture. Culture is not, your snacks and your ping pong tables and your location. Culture is how your employees interact with your company every day. And now is a moment when companies can make choices about how their employees feel about them. Just like Michael was saying, we all have a list. And then hopefully we will be able to apply those lessons as we get out of this crisis.
Yeah. One of the things you mentioned when we talked to Prep, Gina, was companies talk about diversity, but they often kind of leave out geographic diversity.
Yeah.
As there's so many different kinds of diversity. One of the other things I love about Mike's video is I think the 5 people in there, they're a woman in Hungary, a woman in India, a guy in Greece, there's a guy in San Francisco, and I forget where the last one is, but they're all over the world. And so Mike, I don't know, I guess I wanted you to talk about community, but if you want to chime in on this diversity question, because you can really tap into that in a brilliant way.
Yeah, I'd love to hit it on a couple of different aspects on that. But one is that you're right, and platforms have no bias, right? Platforms and the way that the matching is made is without bias in its pure form, and I think that brings out that type of opportunity where one of the people in that documentary is a woman from India who's unable to go to the office because of her home situation. And she found TopCoder, and she jokes about not even wanting to tell other people because it's so impactful to her life. She's able to make even more than she was previously. She's able to do it from home. In fact, I'm going to say this because we have a public case study on it. She is one of the testers for Microsoft Teams, right? A collaboration. She does that QA work through the TopCoder platform from home. It's an amazing story. And I think that's one where when I look at this, I'm like, how do we make 1 million of those stories? And that's truly impactful. She's doing QA work at home in India on Microsoft Teams for a team in Seattle. It's a great story. And I do think when you look at geographic, so gender is one, geographic is one, background, pedigree. This is difficult for people, especially in the academic space, to sometimes grasp, but it doesn't matter if you have a PhD from MIT, right? If you're able to solve a certain problem, And in fact, I think that a lot of academic institutions are starting to realize this as they're looking to see, what is Coursera and models like that doing to our educational system, and what is it going to do what is it going to do next year?
Yeah.
When colleges are already debating whether they're going to open the doors in September. What's going to change? What's going to happen? A lot of change is going to come from that. But the other aspect of it from a community perspective, let me give you a quick example. We ran a project for Harvard and in collaboration with Dana-Farber to basically use artificial intelligence and computer vision to determine where radiation should be applied for somebody that has a lung tumor, lung cancer. And it's a hugely complex problem. And in the traditional model, in order to solve this, we needed to be able to vet hundreds of minds. And we did that in days, right? We can go to our community. It would be the equivalent of having to interview 500 people, find out which one of them has the skill that I need, that I want to tap into, getting them into an environment where they can work with other people to solve this problem. We're able to do that in a platform model and an automated model in days. And we were able to create a dream team of 12 data scientists, very diverse backgrounds, all over the world, no connection whatsoever, and solve this problem. And the results were something that you wouldn't have been able to do it unless you had the reach of a platform. Because at the end of the day, we got an algorithm that was as accurate as a panel of 15 oncologists sitting inside of Boston.
Wow.
So those problems are things that it takes a community model, takes a platform model to be able to accomplish that. And the thing that I love about it is those 12 people, that dream team that I call them, they never would have had even the opportunity to work on such a great problem. Never mind get paid for it, get notoriety for it, get it added to their profile, be able to share it with their friends. They just never would have been invited to the table to participate in it.
Yeah.
So one last thing, and I'll give it right back to you, is security. We talked about that a second ago. Gina brought it up. And I think that, if I had a brushstroke right now, coming out of this, it is possible to have security in a virtual environment. We've been forced to do this in the last
We've been struggling with that on this session, by the way, but go on.
Thank you.
But you are able to do it. You are able to, and I always say to people is, knowing who's on the other end of an Ethernet connection. I know how they work. I know the behavior they work. I know where they are. I can have biometrics, two-factor authentication, GPS location, all of these things on the other end of an Ethernet cord to know exactly who that person is, how they're behaving, how they're working. Are they healthy? Are they sick? You can glean so much of that just from the way that somebody is working, right? Some of their behaviors. Now, tell me that isn't more secure than a giant office floor with 1,000 people that card in every day. Just spend 10 minutes in front of a door to a secure facility, see how many people come out and, have a smoke break and put a rock in the door, or let somebody else in their ID, or, who's actually sitting on that computer. These are problems we don't think about in our environment. In this environment, we're born to think about them. So I'll toss it back to you.
Well, one of the other things I want to just quickly mention, or have you mention if you want, that I love about what you do is you use these competitions as a way to qualify people, and then who's really good. So when you get a corporate client, you say, well, this person scored 10th in a competition of 500 people. We know they could deliver this sort of Java functionality or whatever. I mean, I don't know if you need to even go on about that because I just said it, but it's a very creative approach.
Well, David, let me just something that this sparked for me too. I just want to make sure, because if we agree on everything, then it's not interesting, right? So I do want to challenge one thing that Mike D said that I just it is entirely possible to have platforms that are not biased. There aren't many, and if because you and your team and Gina's teams have actually intended to try to make them as accessible platforms as possible, then cover those talents. That's great. But when Lyft suddenly was not able to provide any work for its drivers, the bias in the platform was there was no work. And Lyft literally said, oh, you've got to go over there to Postmates to find work because we don't have anything for you. So there are tremendous strengths in unbundling work and letting workers be able to find and dynamically bind around the problems that they feel that they're best for, and that hopefully to be able to make that match as good as possible. I want to make sure we're not leaving behind the ones that are usually left behind. And that's the, 70 to 80% of people that have work that cannot easily be put on a platform, or when it gets put on a platform, potentially puts them at a disadvantage. So, and I also want to make sure, so that's the challenge we've got to optimize for, is how do we actually make this more inclusive?
But Gary, I got a question for you. Could
Yeah.
can you envision a world where we could build fair platforms for that other, at least a large portion of that other 80%, so that it would help address that issue?
So from a design heuristic standpoint, more, but remember, first off, we're talking about work that actually is digitizable, right? You can't digitize delivering food to somebody's table in a restaurant. You've got to be there to do it. Although obviously you could throw a robot at it, but basically there's a ton of work that doesn't easily lend itself to moving to these kinds of platforms. Now we've found in a blind, with the Great Reset, we've hit a button, and then we said everything that could possibly be done remotely will do. But as I think both Mike and Gina pointed out, I mean, organizations have just scrambled to try to deal with it. They were prepared. And so what ends up happening is, I think my worry is that people are going to basically reset after the reset, back to older habits. They're going to start to demand that people be in the same place. They're going to fall back on this, management by surveillance kind of model. And when instead we've got all this opportunity to be able to do what both of them are saying, is to find talent anywhere and leave it in place. So what I would like to urge, HR leaders of organizations to be thinking about is, a lot of the conversation, David, going way back, when you and I in the 90s were journalists, and, there's a lot of, and IT was going through this same sort of, trying to have relevance. They always just say, how can we have a seat at the table? I mean, literally CIOs would say, I'm being boxed out. Why am I not part of the process of helping the organization achieve its goals? Well, that's what a lot of CHROs are saying nowadays, is they want a seat at the table. They want to be part of this process. I say, actually, that's the wrong question. You should be building a new table. You should be building a table that creates this network that both Gina and Mike are talking about, where you can actually have a portfolio of human talents that you can channel to solve a wide range of problems. And whether you pay them a full-time payroll and you give them benefits, or they're somebody that you're finding that's just coming through a platform, and you have to figure out what are the ways you are going to create the kind of culture with that network that makes it inclusive.
And there are incremental ways to move toward this. I heard
Absolutely.
Danny Meyer talking yesterday. Danny Meyer's laid off like over 2,000 restaurant workers in his mostly New York restaurants, and also Shake Shack. I thought Shake Shack's separate, just his restaurant group. But they have created all these platforms that they've built even just in these few weeks to raise money for them, for one thing, and they've raised a lot of money, but also to train them in skills, like to have the cooks teaching sous chefs how to do new things. They've got all kinds of things they're doing in the interim, as because they are a responsible employer.
Well, that's key. Training is huge.
And also Danny Meyer has been the standard bearer for the idol for everyone. I mean, he is the most equitable restaurant owner, I think.
Well, we need more. We need to refer constantly to the good models, don't we?
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many bad ones.
I do think, Gary, I think you're right, and it is not all sunshine and rainbows. But I do put my faith into solving those problems and making sure that 80% doesn't get left behind. I do put my faith in marketplaces, in the correct matching of supply and demand in a marketplace style models. They have to be governed. They have to be done correctly. They have to make sure that there's, the right things are in place. But I do completely agree with you that there is still a giant problem, and that does have to get solved, and that's going to take a long time to solve. And we only focus on a corner of the world, and I know there's a huge other piece of it. I think we need people like yourself, to help keep on making sure that we're holding people accountable to those things.
Well, I think David hit the right point that both you and Ginny, you guys have created great communities. The challenge is that there's a whole bunch of workers that aren't part of communities like that, and then they can't speak with a single voice. So we've got this massive descent in labor participation, which was the counterbalance as, as companies were obviously wanting to try to pay as little as possible for workers and hire them where they wanted and not in places they didn't want. But now we've got this opportunity to be able to unbundle all of that. What I want to make sure we don't lose, that we include, is keeping that kind of balance, because what you guys have done in your platform is you've tried to balance that to make sure that the right talent meets the right problem. And as we expand, we must design for that level of inclusion, not just that people are just on the platform, but they actually have access to either find or create meaningful, well-paid work.
Well, I think one of the things with us, sorry to interrupt you, David, is like 70%. So we're I think a little bit different in that we're solving a problem for a demographic that can't even figure out traditionally how to practice their skills. And we did a survey just recently. 70% of our members would go back to work full-time for the right environment, the right level of flexibility. For us, it's also the opportunity to create a community that understands these problems and then put them into leadership. Like for us, our mission is to close the gender pay gap and to get rid of this whole, the inequity in the C-suite. So if we can continue to get our members the jobs that they need in that specific moment, many of them will continue to be consultants for the rest of their lives, but many of them want to go back to work full time so they can implement changes that make more equitable workplaces so that we can, and I think that's probably unique to our community. But I do believe you need stakeholders who are in a position to have had a diversity of experience as well, that they haven't worked for the same company for 27 years, and that maybe they have been a consultant or maybe they have been laid off. I mean, I think one of the things that we also have to take into consideration is the way that we look at somebody. I think Michael was talking about this, the way that we look at somebody's background and their CV. What we think now is like, why is there a gap? Where were you then? And these are not things that corporate America looks kindly on. So I think that's another thing that we at the Second Shift talk about a lot is how does your unique viewpoint of your career make you into a better leader once you do go back to work full time?
There's so many ways these problems will get addressed. I think we're going to have to wrap very shortly, but we had a session on Wednesday at Techonomy with Rashad Tabakawala, who's one of the kind of great thinkers about business. And he's very adamant that we are entering a radically new era. And one of the parts of it that he strongly predicts is a much stronger resurgence of unions. And, in a sense, what you guys do, you platform operators, is you help people organize in a way that back in an earlier era, unions did. And I think people see these Amazon workers going out on strike, and that is making an indelible impression on a lot of Americans and people around the world, that maybe we need a little more structure on the worker side. Absolutely. Which, who knows how it will emerge, and maybe the unions will be in a new form. But if somebody like Rashad is certain to see a rise in unions, that to me means we are going into a new landscape of work.
I hope he's right.
Well, he probably is, because he tends to be right. But I just want to invite any of you to say anything you might have wanted to say that we didn't get to. It's been a fantastically rich and wide-ranging discussion. Anything that you've been wanting to say you didn't get a chance?
David, just quickly, I'll just jump in because I want to ask. There were a bunch of questions, and unfortunately, we're not going to be able to have time for questions. But about, Gary, you just mentioned the word benefits. A lot of people have texted in about accessible health insurance. I know we've had conversations about lending, right? Traditional lending organizations, it's very hard to give a work history or a predictable work history. How does the ecosystem have to change, the health insurers, the banks, to really allow for people to take on this kind of work? Does that whole ecosystem have to change?
Absolutely. So if you want a fascinating book, just talks about a lot of these dynamics, and then the sort of the wrapper of things that we've bundled into traditional jobs that we need to unbundle. Read Mary Gray's book on ghost work. She's a researcher who's really sort of talked about some of the new structures that we need to have. But essentially what we've done is we've anchored so many benefits of civil society in jobs that we need to unbundle, along with everything that Mike and Gina are talking about, in unbundling the actual work itself. And so what we're going to need are new constructs that'll be things like micro benefits, so that somebody on platforms can say, listen, I'm different from that guy over there because I actually need you to be contributing to my 401k or to my healthcare, but that guy doesn't need that. Okay, so he can bid in a different way. And the platforms are going to need to support that. But we also need to have ways that individuals can build reputational capital that is not just tied to a job. This is one of the biggest challenges in poverty-stricken areas, is that it's a spiral down because you can't build those assets so that you can actually get loans and so on. And so we have to unbundle those from jobs as well. And the platforms actually lead, there's some opportunity to be able to leverage them and do things like micro-credentialing and micro benefits and micro reputation building.
We call that the health and the wealth issue. And it's a huge focus for us, because I think in order for platforms to really succeed, that the health and wealth issues, health benefits, wealth, retirement, have to be solved. And we've been working with a global insurance company, just give you on the healthcare one. It's a ridiculously complicated problem, and the existing infrastructure does not satisfy it. When you're looking at 190 countries and people that have totally different needs across those countries, we need a new solution to that. We can do it over 30 countries, but frankly, I sort of feel like, I don't know if that's fair. I can do it to 30, but what about the rest of the countries of the people participating?
Yes. So Mike, presumably it's easier for you in some of the European countries that have a very strong social safety net than it is for you in a country like the US, which has historically said every person for themselves, right?
Yeah, they all have different challenges. Yeah.
Yeah. Gina, any last thoughts?
David, you and I talked about this yesterday. When you look at where we are right now and the idea that we only have two classifications of workers in the United States, you're either a 1099 and you're a consultant, or you're full-time. This also to me seems like an antiquated way to look at talent as well. Folks that are in my community and many that are in Mike's community are doing this because this is their chosen way of work. Whereas when you're a Lyft driver, it's a very, very different, you need to be protected. And so I think that this is where governmental oversight in terms of looking at these new problem solving ways of working has to get involved. But I mean, when I asked my representative about that, she told me I should call my representative. So,
Well, thank you again. And thank you to Ulysses. And what was the other cat's name?
Oh, that's Gibson Haven Hadley.
Gibson, thank you. Okay, Gibson has been really playing a very happy and useful supporting role.
His quarantine has been, he is the happiest creature on the planet. He's never spent this much time with us
This is the new world of work. Here we are.
The animals are going to be really happy in this new world of work.
Right. And very upset when we all go back to work, right?
Yeah.
So, no, thank you again, Gina, Gary, Mike. Thank you to Wipro for helping us make this possible. We appreciate you all joining us today.